Dear foreign ministers, ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ólafur Harðarson and I am Dean of the School of Social Sciences at the University of Iceland, and I'll be chairing this meeting. I'd like to start by welcoming all the participants, and special thanks to those who have joined us from abroad, some of them very far away. They are helping us make this a truly trans-Arctic event that will reflect the wide stretch and impact of the emerging Arctic agenda, as well as the wide range of interested players. This conference is offered to you by the Center for Arctic Policy Studies, CAPS, that we have just founded here at the University of Iceland, and our academic partner in Sweden, the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, SIPRI. However, we would not have been able to create such an event without the generous support and involvement of the Swedish Ministry of Foreign Affairs and our own foreign ministry here in Iceland. I would like to offer them our warmest thanks here at the outset. The Ministry's support is symbolized in the best possible way by the presence here this evening of their Excellencies Össur Skarphéðinsson, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Iceland, and our special guest, Carl Bildt, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Sweden. Carl Bildt is also the current chair of the Arctic Council and will be presiding over the Council's important upcoming meeting at Kiruna in May. Without more ado, I would like to invite the ministers to give their presentations. I suggest that we hear them both, and then there should be plenty of time for questions and discussion. And if you will start, Össur, the floor is yours.
Well, my good friend, Carl Bildt, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, delegates, dear friends, there's a lot of people I know here. Well, it really is a privilege for me to be able to participate in this conference with my good friend Carl Bildt that I've known for many years. And perhaps no one knows it better than me, what a friend of Iceland he really is. But he's also, especially in later years, become a real enthusiast about the Arctic. And it is a special pleasure to have him here with us today, because he really is finishing a 2-year stint as the leader of Sweden within the Arctic Council. And I can say that they have really emerged from that 2-year period with flying colors. I can also say I think it is a miracle that we have been able to tie Carl Bildt down in Iceland. In face of his hectic schedule, he is usually a guy that can be found at least on the telephone somewhere in the Caucasian republics before lunch and after lunch, sometimes in Northern Africa. And he may even fly back home to his beloved Sweden via Australia in the night. He's that type of a guy. So it will be very interesting to listen to him here later this evening. But I warn you, the man has a very dry wit. And it is also a privilege for me to congratulate the University of Iceland on account of the newly established Center for Arctic Policy Study. This is a very positive and welcoming initiative by my old alma mater, and this serves to further broaden the base of Arctic knowledge here in Iceland. In Iceland, as in so many countries, the Arctic is gradually moving to the forefront. It is changing rapidly with the melting of the ice much faster than we ever anticipated. And this certainly creates new dangers for the inhabitants of Iceland, but also a wealth of new opportunities. And for us, the policymaker, the challenge is to balance these factors and prepare for the opportunities, by confronting the dangers in responsible manner. In 1784, Benjamin Franklin wrote about a bluish fog curling over Europe and North America, resulting in one of the coldest winters on record, with ice floating past New Orleans through the Mississippi River into the Gulf of Mexico. And Franklin later wrote that the fog of dust originated from a country in the north named Iceland, reaching America through the northern hemisphere. This was caused by the catastrophic Laki eruption in southeast Iceland, leading not only to the decimation of Icelandic people, but also to several years of very cold spells in Europe. It destroyed crops and harvest, causing great hardship for the poor people of several countries in Europe. And historians have actually theorized that these hardships led to the rebellious epoch in European history that resulted in the French Revolution of 1789. And as we know, the French Revolution became the mother of countless revolutions all over the world. It led to parliamentary democracy, and its effects may still today be difficult to fully understand. Or to quote a former colleague of me and Carl Bildt, Foreign Minister Xu Enlai, who was once asked about the influence of the French Revolution some 200 years later, and is reputed to have dryly remarked, "Well, it is too early to say." I use this story of how an eruption in Iceland may have indirectly influenced democracy of the modern world to underscore how events in one part of the world can have long-lasting and very dire consequences far removed in space and time. What happens in the Arctic isn't isolated to the Arctic. Indeed, events in the Arctic, they may decide whether whole communities, even nations far away, will continue or cease to exist. Our next door neighbor, Greenland, the world's biggest island, is 6 times the size of Germany. And she is covered by a thick ice cap. The melting makes it lose 200 gigatons of ice each year. And this giant of a glacier will continue to melt with growing rates as the global temperature rises. And the melt may finally result in the submersion of entire countries in another part of the world, such as in the South Pacific, and raise the sea level above vast low-lying areas in countries such as Bangladesh, destroying the habitat where tens of millions of people live today. And the global warming will, through a variety of pathways, also lead to massive damages to crops and harvests in many already very poor countries. And let's put some of the changes and the costs in perspective. A recent World Bank study concluded that adapting to the impacts of climate change will cost 75 to 100 billion US dollars per year in the developing world from 2010 to 2050. And in comparison, the total official development assistance in the world, 2011, according to the OECD, was around 124 billion US dollars. And this is a reflection, but only a reflection of the magnitude of some of the consequences of global warming. But as I stated earlier in my remarks, the melting also creates some new opportunities, not least for the Arctic states. But these, however, are also fraught with new challenges and threats that must be confronted. In our own backyard, we in Iceland are witnessing opportunities related to the oil exploration in what we have called the North Atlantic Energy Triangle, covering East Greenland to the Jan Mayen Ridge and south to the Icelandic Dreki area. Exploration for hydrocarbons is already underway within the triangle, and what seemed to be a futuristic dream about trans-Arctic shipping only a few years back is now not only possible, but a viable option for Asian and European investors interested in maritime services along new cargo routes that may bring great material benefits to the world at large, but also to Iceland and the Arctic states. Only last Friday, the head of the Chinese Polar Institute, Yuchen Yang, told me that the Chinese already estimate that the center route across the North Pole may, as soon as in the year 2020, be open 4 months every year for strengthened ships of the type already being operated in the Kara Sea. And Professor Lawrence C. Smith of UCLA, a visitor to Iceland last week, he recently published an article based on simulation models that predict that the center route will be open for such ships all year round as early as 2040 or 2050. That is about half a century earlier than we discussed, some 5, 7, 10 years ago. Obviously, there is a range of possible future scenarios for the Arctic development. What is clear, however, even unavoidable, is that in this century, the Arctic will be engaged by transpolar shipping along the new routes across the North Pole, cruise tourism that has already taken off, fisheries of pelagic species that will find rich new habitats as the ice sheet disappears, mining for hydrocarbons, minerals, and a multitude of services to the diverse human activities the Arctic will soon encounter. And one of my first tasks as a foreign minister was therefore to define the Arctic as a priority in Iceland's foreign policy. And the policy that I formulated and put to Parliament unanimously agreed, that is a very rare thing in our day and age in our Parliament. It aspires to be a balancing act in how to respond to the emerging challenges and clearly new threats, whilst at the same time formulating broad guidelines on how the new opportunities can be embraced. In short, this policy emphasizes that the key to success is through international cooperation, whether dealing with the many risks associated with a changing Arctic or the various new economic opportunities. And in this respect, we place a strong emphasis on the future role of the Arctic Council. I think it finally has come of age, it has matured, and it is developing the self-confidence necessary to stimulate global approach to the most urgent problems in the region, and also to build bridges of cooperation to stakeholders outside the regions. And I believe the Council's first major achievement after the Cold War was to build trust, based on the simple fact, supported by scientific and traditional knowledge, that we share our common environment, and therefore we have a common responsibility for its protection and sustainable use. And this, I believe, should be the guiding principle for the Council to keep its relevance and its leadership as the main forum for Arctic cooperation. We must work together. We must refrain from the temptation to undermine it by subgroups of Arctic states or unilateral actions. And we should allow ourselves the luxury to have frank discussions that focus on minimizing our differences and maximizing our shared interests. Even the famous event when the Russian flag was raised at the Arctic Ocean floor, which caused quite a stir internationally, was in fact an unexpected display of international cooperation. You may not know it, but it was actually initiated by an Australian entrepreneur, assisted by a retired American submarine captain, and of course it was paid for by a Swedish industrial tycoon. Now, one of the controversial questions with regard to the Arctic Council these days is the admittance of new non-Arctic members with observer status. And as some of you may know, I have in general supported such applications, provided the respective applicants are able and willing to contribute to the scientific work of the Council, and respect the right and the responsibilities of the Arctic states. The interest of powerhouses such as China, European Union, India, Japan, South Korea, and others should, I believe, not be seen as a threat to our cooperation, but more as an acknowledgement of our success. And I also believe this is a way to strengthen the Council, as it will underscore its central role as the only international forum for all issues Arctic, and thus will increase its relevance internationally. Already the many challenges that are facing the region are being dealt with. And under the very able leadership of Sweden in the chair, the Arctic Council has been leading the way for cooperation with businesses and their involvement in contributing to sustainable development in the Arctic. And in the field of prevention, under the auspices of the Arctic Council, the Arctic states are preparing best practices for oil and gas activities, and they are also actively involved in developing an international code for safety for ships operating in polar water, the so-called Polar Code. On response, the Arctic states signed a legally binding agreement on search and rescue in 2011, and in May, they will also sign an extensive agreement on oil spill response at the ministerial meeting in Sweden. And I'm very proud of the fact that both these agreements were actually concluded here in Reykjavik, in Iceland. And to conclude, ladies and gentlemen, I think that we should concentrate on building on the success of the Arctic Council in two ways. Firstly, we should continue to develop our regional cooperation further from policy shaping to more policy making. And secondly, we should also use the Council as a bridge to link the Arctic in a constructive way to the international community, including non-Arctic states, international businesses, and other stakeholders. Thank you very much.
I'd like to thank the Icelandic Foreign Minister, and now we have the Swedish Foreign Minister, Carl Bildt.
Thank you very much, Excellencies, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, Össur. It's always a pleasure to come to Iceland, has to be said, and to Reykjavik. And Össur and I have been, over the years, discussing all sorts of issues related to the development of both of our countries, Nordic cooperation, Arctic issues, European issues, and it's always fruitful to exchange views and experiences and share perspectives. I think it's also nice, I have to say, to come back to Saga Hotel. I think I have memories for a quarter of a century, I think, of different Nordic meetings taking place here, discussing all of the different issues that are always there in the often vastly underreported in the media, but enormously important structures of Nordic cooperation that we do have. And I am, of course, honored to be able to come here and say just a couple of words as introduction to our discussions about the different issues that we are confronted with. The Arctic is, of course, as you know, becoming fairly hot. And with hot, I refer not only to the issues related to the effects of global warming, but also to the growing, almost exploding, you might say, interest in the Arctic that has come as a result of globalization, as a result of global change, and as a result of the different advances in modern technology. There are two distinct parts of the story about the Arctic today. One of them is obviously the promising one. The other, unfortunately, somewhat more disturbing. On the promising side, there are all of the new opportunities that are obviously opening up. Össur mentioned as well the increase in maritime traffic that we perhaps can expect. And we saw already this year 46 ships that went through the Northern Sea route north of Russia last year, that is. That is a significant increase if you look at the figures somewhat further back during the years. We have resources such as oil, gas, and I would say primarily minerals that are becoming available at locations where it was virtually unthinkable to explore for them a decade or two ago, and that has also been, of course, furthered by the advance in modern mining technologies that are making new things possible. And we do see the economy is growing and population increasing in parts of the Arctic where previously unemployment and harsh living conditions forced lots of people perhaps to leave instead of staying and see the opportunities. Iceland is, of course, very much at the heart of the story of this new evolving Arctic world. You will indeed be in a key position to seize the new opportunities, and I welcome the ambitions that you have to develop Iceland as one of the hubs of the evolving Arctic world, be that in terms of shipping, be that in terms of air transport, be that in terms of the academic and political exchanges that this conference is one example of. I can also note that there is a discussion on the European Union, and Iceland is a country that is now negotiating for membership in the European Union. From our Swedish side, of course, we've said that we would warmly welcome Iceland as another Nordic member of the European Union. And I think that would strengthen both the voice of Iceland and that of the European Union on the Arctic issues as we are looking ahead. At the same time, of course, we are all concerned with the other parts of today's Arctic story, that about the accelerating effects of climate change. We know, we all see it, that climate change is happening roughly twice as fast in the polar region as in the rest of the world. What might be an academic debate in other parts of the world is a very living reality in the Arctic world. And the receding ice cap, which you see the estimates also refer to them, that within some decades might not be that much of it during the summer month, is a reminder to us all of the dimensions of the changes now underway. And in addition to what we are now seeing, there is the risk that the melting permafrost could release quantities of methane that exceed the total human population of that today, with further accelerating effects on the process of global warming. An ice-free Arctic would lose its function as the refrigerator of the planet, and it would lead, as Össur indicated, to further climate disturbances that in different ways will be seen all over the world. Development and life in other parts of the world would undoubtedly be affected, some very negatively, somewhat less so, some perhaps in a somewhat different way. This is dramatic indeed. So these are the two parts of the story, the dramatic effects with the damages that could occur, but also the opportunities that are there. It's a story also about an Arctic that is no longer marked by the cold tensions of the Cold War, but instead is a new strategic area for cooperation and development that is gradually opening up, where international cooperation is not frozen, but instead in a creative way breaking new ice. Sweden is, as said, currently in the chair of the Arctic Council, at least for a couple of more months. And the Council, which, as you know, brings the Arctic states, all of them, all 8, around one table, having the representatives of the indigenous peoples of the different countries as permanent participants, is a unique enterprise that has become the centerpiece for all of the efforts that we have to develop multilateral cooperation in the region. There are quite a number of issues, as we know, that needs resolution on the global level or in the very specialized fora that are also there. It is obviously through an inclusive global agreement that we can effectively deal with the overall issue of global climate change, reduction worldwide of greenhouse emissions. We can do our share, but that's not really what is decisive. It is through agreements between those concerned and an orderly process within the law of the Sea Convention that the remaining issues of sovereignty and jurisdiction in the Arctic can be resolved. The global framework for resolution of these issues is truly important. And it is through the adoption of a mandatory polar code in the International Maritime Organization that we best can promote safe Arctic shipping with all of the challenges that lies ahead in that particular area. But there are still, this being said, very many areas in which the Arctic Council can and should play a key role. The Arctic Council must, in order to be seen as legitimate, bring positive change also for the 4 million inhabitants of the extreme north. And it must help the entire region, somewhat wider with perhaps 10 million people, to seize opportunities and address challenges in a multitude of other areas. Together with the other countries, as was mentioned, we are now preparing for the ministerial meeting in Kiruna in May, where we will end the Swedish chairmanship of the Council. It will also, as a matter of fact, mark the end of 6 years of Nordic chairmanship of the Arctic Council and hand over to 4 years of North American chairmanship, first by Canada and then after that by the United States. We have a record, I believe, of moving forward on a number of issues during these years. We have established the Standing Arctic Council Secretariat in Tromsø with a very able head of that, who was selected after an international process that was amazingly pain-free, which I think speaks to the competence of the candidate. And we hope this will contribute to facilitating and strengthening cooperation. We have a binding agreement on cooperation on marine oil pollution preparedness and response in the Arctic that, as said, was finally negotiated here, but is ready to be signed by the ministers in Kiruna. And we have the Arctic biodiversity assessment and the Arctic Ocean acidification reports and policy recommendations that are also coming along according to the schedules that we established. In addition, during the Swedish chairmanship, we have initiated work in some other areas of importance. We have started a new dialogue with business. We have tried to improve our external communications, and we have stepped up our work on trying to reduce, and here we in the region can do more, reducing black carbon emission. All of this will, I'm quite certain, be carried forward by the incoming Canadian chairmanship. Some time ago, and you also see it partly reflected in some of the global debate, we feared that the arms race that took place in the Arctic during the Cold War would be replaced by a fierce race for resources with potentially alarming political, perhaps even security implications in the region. But what I think we now see, and what we hope to continue to see, is instead an international race for cooperation in which the Arctic Council does play a very central role. What we are doing today is trying to establish the rules of the game, establishing the structures of cooperation and the frameworks for moving forward together well before we see the actual changes in the Arctic that are now being forecast. It is, as a matter of fact, diplomacy ahead of the challenges. And of course, much too often in our modern world, we see examples of diplomacy, unfortunately, being well behind the game. At the Kiruna ministerial meeting, we will also round up the first full cycle of chairmanships of the Arctic Council. It all started in Ottawa with the first Canadian chairmanship in 1996. And to mark that particular occasion, this occasion, the Arctic states have decided to outline for the first time a statement on what we see as the common vision for the Arctic region in the years and the decades ahead. Something on which all of us can agree, as something that can help and guide us jointly towards the future. Because as peoples up here in the north, there is one thing that we should know. In this somewhat colder part of the world, we can only survive, although it's getting slightly warmer, we can only survive by sticking together in the future. Thank you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, now we have come to the questions and answers section. We have a mobile microphone that will be going around, and I'd like those who want to ask questions or make comments to introduce themselves. Who would like to start?
Yes, my name is Skarphéðinsson. I work as a tour guide here in Iceland. Tack så mycket för din introduktion. I would like to ask about the recent election results in Greenland, where the indigenous people in Greenland decided that how they wanted to frame their policy towards the big corporations that want to utilize the natural resources of this great island nation. Do the election results maybe tell us something about how indigenous people will react to this kind of affair? Thank you.
Well, let me start by saying that we are in favor of elections. If there's one prediction that I'm able to make for nearly all of the members of the Arctic Council is that there will be elections in a number of countries, and that we will see sort of politics evolves. All of these issues that the Arctic nations are going to be confronted with will evolve over time. There will be public debate on quite a number of these issues. And the resource issues are certainly not entirely easy. I mean, we have, without going into the Greenland debate, because they're in the process of forming their governments, and we'll see what kind of policies comes out of that. Up in our north, where we also have a lot of mineral resources, we are now moving half a town in order to make it more possible to explore the mineral resources. Not entirely uncontroversial, but widely debated and eventually decided that is going to be the case. And if you go to Canada, there is a vivid debate about some of these issues when it comes to exploration of natural resources. You see the enormous debate in Alaska, or rather in the United States, on how they should do primarily with oil and gas resources. So I think as we see the region opening up to more of minerals and energy and whatever, there will be debates, and particularly in the areas, countries, or self-ruling areas where there has been relatively little of this in the past. There is the need to thoroughly debate the framework under which it will take place, and that is sort of what is happening on Greenland as we speak.
Well, just to make a brief comment on the elections in Greenland. It's good to have elections, especially, Carl, when you have the Social Democrats winning. That's another story.
Yeah, it should happen sometimes.
Well, it happens many times. It's only in Sweden where you're very, well, stubborn on your past results.
Yes, we are.
But on Greenland, I mean, the inhabitants of Greenland have really been moving quite fast in recent years to use the wealth of their resources. And as I read it, you find two opposing schools of thoughts really within the Greenland population. Some really would like to move fast forward because they see it as the base for their future independence, as some of the population really long for. Others, and you find that in all the indigenous population as well, they want to go much slower. They're a bit afraid of how fast the development goes forward. And you actually saw that reflected in the election campaigns where, for example, mining and export of rare earth metals was an issue. But I think that what you will see out of the elections and the formation of new government in Greenland is that people will, or the government, they will slow a little bit down, but they nevertheless will move ahead. And it's quite clear that in the Arctic, even though Carl Bildt so generously says that Iceland really is in a special position, but I mean the real hot spot in the Arctic is Greenland due to its immense resources of all types.
Wow.
Yeah, Rasmus.
Yes, my name is Rasmus Bertelsen from Aalborg University, Denmark. My question is concerning new permanent observers. And my question is very simply about power and the Arctic Council. Is it a zero-sum game where if you add new people to the conversation, then you diminish the power of the existing members? Or is it a positive-sum game where if you add powerful actors to the conversation, then you increase the power of everybody? Thank you.
Well, first I think it's important to understand that an observer is an observer, period. A member is a member, that's where power lies. An observer is an observer, and also could be sort of part of the conversation, needless to say. But power lies with the permanent, with the member states, and then we have the permanent participants. And one of the things that we make sort of abundantly clear, if it wasn't clear already in the vision statement from Kiruna that I indicated, is that this will remain. So what is then the significance of observers? Well, I mean, first we have to look at the issue now. We will consult exactly where we will end up. I wouldn't have any prediction on that. We have established criteria, and we will jointly evaluate the different those that have applied according to the criteria. But as a general rule, I would say that we have laid down Arctic Council states. Some, as I said, the guidelines, the principles, the frameworks, what we want to be the framework and the principles according to the management of the Arctic region in the years and the decades ahead. I think it is, and one of the criteria, I mean the number one criteria for being accepted as an observer is that you accept this, that you agree to it. International, well, Law of the Sea Convention and all of those particular things. And I would say that the greater the part of the world that signs up to saying that these are the principles that apply and it is the Arctic Council that is the forum that's going to do it, the better is it for the long-term position of the Arctic Council. I mean, there have been some, not very much, but there have been some flurries in the global debate that you should do it in some other way. We should open up the entire issue in some sort of way. There have been some academic and some other trial balloons. And that, in my opinion, is not in our interest. So the more states that come and sign on to the principles of the Arctic Council and to the primacy of the Arctic Council, the Arctic issues, I would say the better from our point of view. That being said, we aren't there yet.
Well, the short answer to your question is no. It's not a zero-sum game. I think new observers, they will add to the overall strength of the Arctic Council. Firstly, they will not be admitted unless they respect the rules and the responsibility of the Arctic states. And secondly, they will only be admitted if they contribute to the scientific work of the Arctic Council, meaning that the result will be greater knowledge, more resources. That is at least what I hope. And secondly, I also think that if the Arctic Council continues for a long time to stave away quite active players that are non-Arctic nations, they will only seek another outlet for their, let's say, views and actions, and by admitting them as active observers based on the conditions laid down by the Arctic states, we are actually removing the possibility that Arctic issues will be taken up and discussed in some other forum. We actually, perhaps because we are a bit selfish, at least myself, I will admit that, Carl, you definitely are not.
No, I mean,
I mean, we want to keep the Arctic Council as the main venue, the main forum where Arctic issues are discussed. And I personally say that I would like to see the Arctic Council develop as it is developing, from being a forum where you only discuss and, well, nowadays shape decisions, to making them. But that will be a long time off in the future.
Yes.
Well, good afternoon. My name is Jón Baldvin, and I'm a former local politician.
Yes.
I would like to thank their excellencies for extraordinarily academic introductions. The key words were dramatic change lies ahead of us, with unforeseeable repercussions. If the past is anything to go by, that is usually not good tidings. Remind you of the scramble for Africa, of the scramble of highly developed countries with expertise and technology to utilize the natural resources of poor countries. Usually the repercussions have been devastating. The Chinese know this, Africa knows this. So, why are you so bloody optimistic? What makes you believe that humankind has learned anything? And what makes you sound so absolutely certain that there will not be a new scramble for the immense riches of the high north by the predators of this world?
Well, Jón Baldvin, you know, I know all about you as a local councillor because I voted for you in Ísafjörður. But I would not be so pessimistic as you seem to be by the tone of your question. I'll tell you why. When you talk about the scramble for richness, implying that the Arctic will develop into a high tension area, well, there is a tool that we have. There is a tool that we have and can use to settle these disputes if they arise. And that tool is the law of the sea. The states of the Arctic Council all uphold that particular treaty. Most of them, all apart from one, have already confirmed it. And this is the tool that we will use if necessary to settle territorial disputes that have been settled very amicably, and as well, of course, to use to settle if disputes arise on other or on the utilization of some riches, some new resources. The most difficult ones to solve, as we know by experience, especially Jón Baldvin as a former Minister of Foreign Affairs in 91 to 3 or 4, when we had some international disputes on fishing. It will be the fishing that in future will be the most difficult to solve. But nevertheless, we have international treaties, especially the law of the sea, that will assist us, and I think will enable us to keep the Arctic as it is today a low tension area, or an area with hardly any tension at all in terms of militaristic matters.
Well, just add to that even if we speak about long-term dramatic change, I think it's important that this is going to be gradual. We are not talking about next week. We are talking about decades ahead. That means that we have time for diplomacy. And that is what I think is really what makes the Arctic Council really as a jewel, is the fact that we are ahead of the game. We are now establishing the rules of the game well ahead of the game. And then the game gradually develops. We can discuss whether these sort of prognosis on shipping lines, is it 2030, 2040 or 2050? We don't know. But we know it's not tomorrow. We have time to try to deal with certain of these issues. And the same with all of these scramble for resources, which we about quite a lot. There are the resources, no question about that. They are interesting. But let's be realistic. It's cold up there. I mean, it's windy. There are all sorts of problems. It's expensive. And even if the resources are very valuable, these are among the more expensive places to explore and exploit in the globe today. And particularly in the energy field, I think this is going to be far slower than some of the things that you see in the media because of other developments that we see. Minerals might be somewhat less affected by it, but it's a gradual development. And the fact that, and I do think that at the moment we have a faster development of the politics of cooperation than we have of the events in themselves. And that is, as I said, rather rare. Normally we have sort of diplomacy trying to catch up with events. Here we have diplomacy trying to get ahead of the events. And so far I think I'm reasonably optimistic that we'll manage it. And for all, I mean, we have, these are some somewhat different countries, needless to say. And some are countries where sometimes we have some difficulties with them. But all of them, none accepted, have so far a rather constructive approach to what we're doing. And that's good news.
My name is Annika Nilsson from the Stockholm Environment Institute. First of all, I don't think we should be so certain that change will be gradual. I think we're in for some surprises, but that's not really what I wanted to raise here. I agree very much with, I think international conflict is the major thing coming ahead. But I think we'll see a lot of local conflicts over land use, when you have traditional activities meeting up with new activities. And my question is, does the Arctic Council have a role that is beyond the international sphere, dealing with issues such as adaptation to climate change, which are normally national or local issues? What role do you see for the Arctic Council in that context?
No, I agree. I mean, of course, we're going to have sort of issues of land use. I mean, if we restrict ourselves to Sweden, we've had the experience up in the north over the last 150 years, massive issues of how to deal with these particular issues. Have we dealt with them successfully? Well, we are still surviving, and it's not the end of the story. These issues are dealt with by the different countries within their different national legal and political system, and I think rightly so. Otherwise it will be too complicated. But the fact that we are cooperating so much, and the indigenous people are cooperating so much, creates a framework for the discussion, where we can perhaps learn from each other to a certain extent how to handle these particular issues. But the issues will be there. The issues are by their very nature not particularly new, because we have been facing exactly the same issues in all of the countries, in perhaps other parts of the countries as well. But now we're coming somewhat closer to each other and can perhaps share experiences somewhat more.
But if I do understand your question correctly, then you're really asking whether the Arctic Council has a role when traditional activities clash with the new invading activities. Perhaps in two ways. Firstly, I mean, the Arctic Council has a lot of scientific and research cooperation that is focused, I believe, in some ways exactly on things like this. So the actions of the Arctic Council can predict when these things might happen, can also forewarn, and can also tell the politicians and the governments how to behave and how to act. But secondly, I would say that because the indigenous associations, they are members of the Arctic Councils, they come to the ministerial meetings, they air their grievances, they lay out their policies, they sometimes take us to the task or are happy with what we are doing, but I believe this is an important channel for them to have direct access to the governments of the Arctic states, which I believe, unfortunately, under normal circumstances, they do not get so easily.
Yeah, at the back.
much for your comments. Paul Berkman, scholar at large. I was pleased to hear that in Kiruna there will be a revisiting of the Ottawa Declaration and considering of the common purposes of the Arctic Council. When the Ottawa Declaration was Arctic Council was established, two common Arctic issues were identified: sustainable development and environmental protection. Prior to that, going back to the Rovaniemi Declaration, there were discussions about peace being an explicit issue of common interest among the Arctic states. However, in 1996, when that came to the table, the topic was removed. When you revisit the issues in Kiruna, will you explicitly identify peace as a common Arctic issue?
Well, I hope we are in favor of peace, and I think we are. But that being said, I think we are still in a position where sort of explicit issues of security, because that's what your question alludes to, will be outside the framework of our cooperation. There can be an informal dialogue, but the security issues will be outside of it. But we are in favor of peaceful cooperation, needless to say. We don't want violent conflicts and violent solutions, but we are setting up mechanisms for the peaceful resolution of remaining issues of jurisdiction or whatever it is. But security issues outside the framework, I think that's a wise thing.
Yeah, we have time for one more question or two. Yeah.
Thank you very much. My name is Ye Jiang. I'm from Shanghai Institute for International Studies from China. Maybe most of you will predict that I will ask the question of China's status as an observer, but actually I won't ask this question because you have already said you won't predict this one. But my question is that when you say that you won't predict who will be the next observer and so on and so forth, you said that actually, according to your personal view, that you think that the more calm in the Arctic Council, when they abide by those rules and so on and so forth, it will be better for the Arctic Council in terms of the regional governance and so on and so forth. But my question is that, is this your personal view, or you just represent Swedish government's view, or because you are the chairman of the Arctic Council at this moment, or whether you represent the Arctic Council, or whether there's a consensus towards this issue? Thank you very much.
That's a rather good question that I'd like to know the answer of as well, because that's exactly what we are discussing. But I would guess that most of the Arctic Council states would agree with that in general terms. But they might say that this might not be the time. They might say that these are not really committed to the extent that we want. They might say they are not sufficiently committed to devoting the resources. So it still, you can agree with these, and it still boils down to evaluating the different applicant states and others according to the criteria that are there. And that, I think, is a debate that is going to be there up until Kiruna. And then let's look at it. This is going to be evolving. I don't think that all of these issues will be resolved by the Swedish chairmanship. We'll hand over to Canada, also because of the fact that there are likely to be new applications. And that with the increased interest that we see in these issues, we will need to continue to adapt the way in which we work. Also to adapt to the situation where the number of observers is highly likely to increase in the future. But exactly how, the pace, and the way it will be done, that's something that is still under discussion.
Well, my friend, where does the European Union and the United Nations look when they need a master diplomat to negotiate and mediate? To this guy. I mean, he was the guy that...
That's, you mean I don't answer
questions? No, he was the guy that was acquired to, well, let's say, solve few things down in the Balkans some years ago, and he did it with, you know, with flying colors in many ways. So I have no doubt that the master diplomat at my right side, he will solve this in Kiruna. That is his duty, as I told him today.
Yeah, and the final question.
I'm Professor Lassi Heinonen from University of Lapland, Finland. I would like to continue that discussion on security matters, because I see that there is some sort of turning point now when it comes to the Arctic Council. Actually, the Ottawa Declaration says that excluded matters dealing with military security. And as we know, nuclear safety was big issue. And one of the successful stories what the Arctic Council has managed to handle, maybe not yet solved. So my question is that what about other kind of approach to security, like for example, security related to climate change, representing comprehensive security? Would that be the way to broaden the discussion on security in the context of the Arctic Council? Thank you.
You can always play around with words, and you can have such a broad definition of security that it includes everything, but then security at the end of the day means nothing. But when we speak about security, we normally refer to the hard security, the military things, and they are outside, and I think that is rightly so. Environmental security, you mentioned the nuclear safety issues, said they have been dealt with. Well, not really within the Arctic Council framework, that's more in the Barents, where there are still X numbers of outstanding issues, by the way, up in north of you, in that particular vicinity, where we've made significant progress. And we do have, we have the Barents cooperation that's been quite effective. We have the northern dimension of the European Union that Össur and I talked about previously, dealing with some of these other issues as well. So there are different ways of dealing with these particular issues. You can define them as security if you want to, absolutely, I'm with you, but it still does not, it's a question of bringing the military security issues into the Arctic Council, because then you would have X numbers of the members of the Arctic Council saying no, and I don't think I need to mention in particular which ones that might be the most vocal first.
Yeah, we are then coming to the close of this session. We need to move to the next important business of an icebreaker drink.
An icebreaker.
We look forward to seeing you all tomorrow morning.
I won't be there tonight.
You won't be there. Okay.
I will be here early in the morning. It was a very enjoyable discussion.
No, very good as usual. Always is.
So there will be a possibility for further discussions with him.
See if we get any
Finally, I'd
light
like to
tonight.
joining me in a closing.
Was it now?
Our
Yeah.